Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you're able to join us today. I'm Lori Nelson, the Director of Alumni Relations at the University of Utah S.J. Quinney College of Law, and I'm glad you were able to join us today. I'm also thrilled to be able to introduce to you three of our alumni who are going to present on the topic of the changing Utah legal market. Before we get started, I want to do some housekeeping. You have to stay on for the entire hour pursuant to Utah Supreme Court rules. If for some reason you bounce off and you have to get on using a different ID than you registered for, so you use a phone number instead of an email, for instance, please email me at lori.nelson@law.utah.edu and let me know that you went off and got back on and what your new sign on information, what that is, so I can make sure that you get credit. Also, this is going to be an open discussion format. Please use the Q&A feature, not the chat feature. We won't see it if it's the chat, but we'll be monitoring the Q&A, and we want you guys to ask whatever questions you have, that we will try to get them answered as timely as we can. If you see a question pop up that you wanted to ask, go ahead and upvote that question. As the questions get upvoted, they'll rise to the top of the ranking, and we can get the questions that most people are interested in hopefully answered in a quicker fashion. Now, before we begin, I'd like to introduce you to our panel. First of all, I'd like to introduce and thank Jason Hardin, who is the president of Fabian VanCott. I'd also like to welcome Elizabeth Butler. Liz is the chairman of the board of directors at Jones Waldo, and Tyler Buswell, who sits on the board of directors at Kirton McConkie. So you three, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. This has been a pretty interesting topic for me to get informed about. And what I would like to just start with is just the first question. A lot of national law firms are moving into the market, and they've been moving in pretty quickly, and it's all happened very fast. How do you guys think this is impacting local law firms?
Well, I don't know what you're talking about, Lori. I haven't heard that. Sorry. Yeah, it's been pretty significant movement over the last 6 months. I mean, I think the biggest impact that we've seen is, there's been a real tightening of the labor market. I mean, that's the number one. I mean, and a lot of pressure on probably the lower end more than the higher end, for sure, as far as labor goes. I don't know the exact numbers, but I think the big law firms, as I'll call them, national law firms that are moving in are, I think, estimated to trying to soak up 200 to 300 attorneys from our market. So certainly makes for a tight labor market.
Liz and Tyler, are you seeing anything else?
No, I agree with all that. I mean, I think it also presents some interesting opportunities for local law firms because at least so far, it seems that all of these national firms have been doing work not with local clients. And so the talent pool working local clients has actually gotten a little bit smaller, presenting an opportunity for local firms to acquire more local work.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I would add on to what Jason and Liz said is, I think the other sort of trickle down effect is because of the tightening of the labor market and just sort of competition for good associates. Most law firms have increased associate pay. And then the trickle down effect of that is, well, how do you then compensate people? Well, most law firms in town have increased rates. So there's been a couple of things that have sort of happened where, again, just trying to make sure the local law firm, compensation model is not the same as a national law firm comp model. And so trying to make that work, for us, tweak our, the local comp systems to make it work with, increased pay for associates and increased rates and all those sorts of things. I think that's a big one. How that plays out, I'm sure we're going to talk more about how that plays with other recruiting and things like that. Obviously that remains to be seen, but I think initially those are things that we've seen already.
Well, and that our first question is, what will the Cravath compensation grid do to associate salaries? And you've answered that in part. The ramifications that I see is if you raise salaries, you have to raise your hourly rate because your fixed expenses don't change. And if you do that, how does that impact local clients and their ability to access legal services?
Yeah, that's a huge concern for all of us. I mean, you know, again, the local firms who are represented here on the panel today, I mean, we generally have a broad swath of clients. We have, you know, individuals here locally. We have high net worth individuals. We have private companies, small, large. We have national companies, regional companies, you know, whereas the big firms, they mostly have big clients, big publicly traded clients of that nature. And so the pressure that it's putting on it, exactly as you noted, it's going to be, we're going to have to raise our rates. We already I think all three of our firms have raised associate salaries in the past year. You know, we're still not really going to be competitive. I don't think any of our firms are going to be equal to what Kirkland and Ellis or Cravath are paying, but you know, we have certainly increased our salaries, and that's going to be to the benefit of associates. But I think, you know, as far as our firm goes, and I think it's the same at Kirton and Jones Waldo, you know, we have also tweaked some of our just other associate benefits and compensation model, and we're giving them the ability to choose their path, you know, moving forward on hours and pay. I mean, we basically have you know, you start here at our firm, you know, you can, as an associate, you get to pick your billable hours that you want to target during a given year, and we just proportionally adjust your salary to that. And that gives them ownership and flexibility that I don't think is offered by the bigger firms. And that's a place where we're trying to compete to continue to, you know, recruit associates. But you're right. I mean, this is a huge effect. It's an effect on salaries, rates, access to justice. I mean, it's a huge impact on our market for sure.
So when you talk about recruiting, are your firms still doing the standard summer associate program? So you're looking for new graduates? Are you looking for early career associates, or you're looking for laterals? Has this changed at all the way your firms do their hiring?
For us, no, not really. We're still doing hiring in all the same ways we were doing it before. I think ultimately we're kind of competing for different people than the national firms are too. I don't think the same person wants to work at a national firm and bill the hours that a national firm requires, that also wants to work at a firm like Jones Waldo, where we don't have as high as pay, but we also don't have the high hour requirement. And I think different firms are going to fit different needs for different people. And so I find that actually, even in recruiting, there are people who are voicing a desire to not work high hours and still, make a good living, but work more reasonable hours. And so I don't necessarily think there's a huge competition, the type of person we're competing for, because I think we can offer different things.
So I can speak to, some things that we've done at Kirton McConkie in the last 6 to 9 months that are slightly different than what we've done before. We are continuing to do everything we've done before. Most of our recruiting is, on campus at BYU in Utah coming out of law school. But one thing we have changed is we now are doing more interviewing with people out of state. So there are a number, we've historically always done some of that, but we are shifting a little bit to look at other law firms because, at least the word is that a lot of these national firms are trying to hire a lot more, want to be competitive for BYU and U grads, which we can understand because they're great. But we also want to keep the level of our quality of associate high. And so if that means we need to go to other law schools to do that, we'll do it. Now, again, we're not abandoning, and I would anticipate that most of our recruits are still going to come from those two schools, but we are also trying to find other sources to make sure that we keep that same quality. So I think that does also then trickle down, at least in what we've been looking at for, lateral associates is same sort of thing. We're looking all over, not just in Utah, but around the country. We want to find people. If we're bringing in laterals, We want to bring in top quality people that meet our needs. And so that is something that we're doing that, again, historically, we've done some of that, but I think that's more kind of on the forefront of our minds because we think that's something we're going to have to do. So I think that's an important little tweak that, that we're thinking about as far as laterals. And I guess one other thought that I would bring up that I would say, to me, one of the biggest unknowns about national firms coming in is how that's going to affect the lateral market in the next 2 to 5 years. Because if you really have, most people that go to big national firms do not stay there long term. So these big national firms have a bunch of great talent, again, they've obviously already taken a lot of talent from the existing pool, but as they continue to build it up over the next couple of years, but then when people leave, what is their exit strategy if they've been at a big firm in Salt Lake their whole career? Can they then transition to, local firms? In some ways, I'm sure they could, but there's also certain skills, including like client development and client relationships and client interaction that they probably have not been developing at a big national firm. And how does that then transition in the future? It's one of these things, again, who knows? It's a couple of years down the line, but I would think that's going to be a really interesting thing. We're obviously just seeing the very start of it, but I think, projecting out a really unique issue for our market is what happens if you have 50 lateral associates a year on the market who were highly trained at big law firms, big national law firms, that they're on the market every year in Salt Lake City. What does that mean? There's a labor crunch right now, but that might not be the case 2 or 3 years from now. So I don't know. That's a really interesting thing that I thought about.
And I'll just add I think that we're doing similar to what both Jones Waldo and Kirton are doing as far as recruiting. I think that we're all doing kind of a little bit different, but also the same. And we'll see how the results turn out. I think that it's going to be harder to hire the normal similar people that we've hired in the past because we're going to be competing with more jobs and higher pay at the big firms. And so I think the pitch you're going to see made, and this is the hard thing to tell a law student. I mean, a lot of law students, they went to undergrad straight into law school, and they haven't really worked a bunch in between, and they don't have a lot of life experience. And so they see the dollars, they see student debt, they see the dollars of a big salary, and that's what they go for. And it's hard to tell them that in doing that, at least in my opinion, they'll be sacrificing career development for short-term dollars. I mean, that's essentially what I think that they'll be doing. And I think that all of our pitch from the local firms to the law students will be somewhat that. It's like it's exactly what Tyler was saying. You come to our firm and you're going to get you're going to interface with the clients. You're not going to be fourth down on the attorney letterhead working on a deal or on a litigation piece. You're going to be number 2 or number 1. And you're going to be actually going to trial. We've got two jury trials going on this week. One of them is first chaired by a guy who's been out and he's in his 8th year. And the second chair is an attorney who's been out his 3rd year. And you're not going to get that experience at a national firm. And so I think that our pitching will have to be more focused on substantively what you get to do and learn as an attorney in your career development versus, hey, if you go to the bigger firms, you're going to make a few bucks. Now, that extra few bucks might be important for people depending on the debt, and that's just a problem. But I'm hopeful that most people will look long term and think, if I go to a local firm, I'm going to make partner quicker. I'm going to make more money quicker because as a partner in a local firm, you make a lot of money. And you're going to get a lot of experience in the process. So hopefully we can convince the same students, to look a little longer term than just shorter term dollars.
So following up on that, does it seem like there's a risk that these students could graduate, go to a big firm, work there for 5 years, and then want to transition to a local firm and have to come in at a lower ranking than, say, a regular 5-year associate? That they might have to come in as a 1 or 2 year just because they lack that client interaction sort of skill building?
I'll lead, and then I'll let Liz and Tyler say something. But the answer is yes. This happened back after the downturn in 08, 09. We had a difference. We had the flip side. We had a labor oversupply, right? We had way too many attorneys. And I remember interviewing several attorneys who had lost their job in New York or San Francisco, and they'd been out 5 to 7 years, and they literally had no experience, and we didn't hire them. I mean, we ended up hiring laterals from other firms in town with more experience. And so that is a problem. And I hope that everyone going to the big firms, look, I mean, the big firms may give them all the experience that we can. I don't think that that's possible in my dealings with the bigger firms. They always have it overstaffed, and there's lots of attorneys on everything. But I do think that that's a risk for them, that if they leave a big firm in 5 years, they may find that their opportunities for local firms are less than they think they are. So.
Yeah, and I don't know if I have a ton to add to that. I would say that there's always a risk of it. I think obviously everyone's going to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, depending on the expense that they have, but certainly something to consider.
Yeah, and that's exactly, I echo what Liz said. I mean, I think it would depend on a case-by-case basis. You know, what is the expertise the individual has? And I would say, you know, national law firms are very successful for a reason. And one of the main reasons why they're really successful is their expertise is unmatched, right? People become so narrowly focused on certain things that, you know, they know so much more because that's all they do. They can do it all day for, you know, for years on these very, very narrow issues. And that is fantastic for what they do. But at a firm like Kirton McConkie, we have 160 attorneys, and we're pretty narrowly focused for Salt Lake, and yet nothing compared to, you know, the partners at the big national firms who are even, you know, again, it just is so tight. And so that's again how that translates then to associates, and then how they can then would potentially transition to a local firm. There's lots of people. We have a number at our firm that have done that really well, who started at a big national firm and were able to transition over, and it was great. But we have also had times where people came from a big national firm, and we essentially had to retrain them on some things because they were so narrow. Again, not because they weren't smart and they weren't doing good things. It was they were so narrowly focused. And so that's just an interesting problem where, you know, again, not that training and experience isn't helpful. It is helpful and it can transition, but there are challenges with that.
Oh, then that's an aspect of it I hadn't considered. A question: when you increase associate pay, what does that do to the equitable pay for more experienced employees? Are salaries being raised across the board? Are the partners having to sacrifice to keep associates? What's going on across the board?
You know, we don't know yet. I mean, I think that's still in flux. I mean, I would go back to what you said at the beginning, which is there's been rate creep. You know, we've certainly raised our rates, and you know, and we believe that the clients will absorb that to a degree. I mean, there's inflation on all fronts in our society right now, and so you know, we have raised partner salaries, but I mean, our partner compensation has always been quite good over here, and I think it will continue that way. But you know, you pay associates more, it generally cuts into your profits unless you collect more for them, and it's just basic math. And so we'll know in a year or two where that's going to pan out.
Liz and Tyler, you agree?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Liz.
No, go ahead. Go, Tyler.
Yeah. No, I mean, we always have, you know, staff increases, and we did have this year. I honestly don't recall if they were, you know, they definitely were not proportionate to our associate increase, but you know, we did still have that. And you know, exactly like Jason said, we have. With the rate increases, we are hopeful that our profits will be roughly consistent with what they've been in the past, but you know, we'll have to see how it all plays out. So this year will be very interesting because our associates did get the increase at the start of our fiscal year, and so we'll see how that plays out.
So with the entry of the national firms, does this help diversify the lawyer demographics for Utah? So does it broaden it for populations that don't fit a norm? Will they have a better shot at cracking the Salt Lake market in the larger firms?
I mean, I think so, because we're going to, as Tyler mentioned, we are too. We're looking out of state as well, because there literally aren't enough attorneys here for all the jobs. I mean, it's just that simple. Think about it. They're going to suck up 200 to 300 new, fairly young attorneys at these new firms, and as at least as I understand, a lot of those 200 to 300 attorneys are going to be doing work for out-of-state clients and out-of-state deals and out-of-state litigation, which means that we're still going to need attorneys to do all of the Utah and regional work, which means we're going to have to go elsewhere and bring other attorneys in. And so I do think I think the result would be yes, we would see an increase in diversification.
What about,
I think not only are we bringing in attorneys from out of state, but a lot of national firms are also bringing in attorneys from to Utah. I know that some of them have brought associates from other states too here. And I think it's a great advantage of having the national firms here is the diversification.
Mm-hmm.
what's the effect on the medium and small firms? Do you think they're going to feel the same issues that our large local firms are feeling?
Definitely.
They already have,
Yeah.
we've hired 2 laterals from one of a smaller firm than us in the last 4 months. I mean, we've been hiring as well. I mean, we've actually brought on, we've had a net gain over the last year in attorneys, and we continue. Right now we're looking at other opportunities to add even more. So the answer is yes. And I think it's going to be a trickle down effect is what's going to happen.
Definitely.
I mean, we're now paying much more than the mid to small firms, at least a chunk of them. And so that's an attraction, I think, to the associates at those firms.
Has the increased pay also gone to staff? Are you losing staff to go to the big firms, the national firms, or have you increased staff pay as well as lawyer pay?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned, we have increased staff pay, but I don't, it's not consistent with as much as what we did with associate pay, but we did increase it. And I don't see a big push for staff to go to those big national firms. Although I would say COVID, really, we saw a lot more movement during COVID just across the board than kind of what we would historically see. So even before the national firms kind of announced that they were coming in, I think COVID caused a lot of kind of jumping around from firm to firm. So at least that was our experience.
So has the demand for lawyers with expertise in sanctions compliance, import remedies, anti-bribery laws and regulations, export controls, international trade, national security, white-collar defense, government investigations, money laundering, and financial technology and payment practices increased in Salt Lake? So has the demand for lawyers in all those little specific areas, big specific areas, but really narrowly focused, Tyler, that you were talking about, is there an increased demand in Salt Lake for those specialties?
You mean increased like in comparison to the number of law firms moving in nationally? I mean, I think there's just always, at least in my experience over the last 2 decades, I have seen an increase in several of the areas you just mentioned, a demand for that, but nothing out of the ordinary. I mean, we certainly had a lot of new companies moving in high tech, but Utah's been high growth for many, many years, and we've seen a steady growth in demand for legal services. So honestly, I don't think it's any different than what we've been seeing in the normal growth pattern.
Okay.
But I mean, I'd like to hear, maybe Liz or Tyler have a different read on that.
No, I mean, I think I completely agree that the growth has been across the board and sort of ebbs and flows with what's happening in the economy. And I'm not sure I've seen a change as a result of the national firms, just as a result of what's happening in the world.
I think, our increase, and we looked really hard at numbers of some of our biggest clients, at year end. And, the need for increased legal services continues to go up. I mean, it's pretty substantial. So, and again, I would say, during COVID, the last 2 years, it's been very, very high. So, and I couldn't really pinpoint one area versus another. It's kind of just across the board.
It's interesting, your question, Lori. It makes me think of kind of a related issue. It's like, why are the big firms moving in right now? Is it because there's a demand for all these new niche areas? And I think the answer is no. I think one of the reasons, at least some of the firms are moving in, I think there's two real reasons. They have a labor crunch. In my experience right now, I've never seen as much legal work that's out there in relation to the number of attorneys that's available. There's a massive amount of legal work that's being needed. Maybe that's caused by the pandemic or not. I don't know. So I think that like Kirkland, they're experiencing that. They can't find the labor in Chicago and New York and elsewhere. So they've come to Utah to hire our attorneys and have them work out of state. That's the first, what I see as the first driver. The second driver is we do have a lot of new high-tech companies that have moved in, and they've been serviced, for years by firms like Wilson Sonsini. And Wilson needs an office here to try to maintain those client relationships because, we do some work for some of those high-tech companies and they think that our work is just as good or cheaper. And so they're coming in to protect their turf. That's the other side of it. Well, and in fact, now those firms are literally hiring attorneys that we hired and trained to do the exact same work at like twice the rate. So
that leads to this question. Are the big firms really developing attorneys to practice in Utah? Or is their primary focus right now, and maybe for the medium, short term, long term, to just work on national clients that aren't specifically Utah clients?
I don't know the answer to that, Lori. I'm interested to see how it plays out. Again, I know Jones Waldo and Fabian's the same. I mean, we have a lot of large clients that hypothetically could afford to go to these big national firms. So are some of these big national firms going to come in and try and take that work away? As of yet, I have not seen that, but that doesn't mean it couldn't change.
So
yeah, that's what I was going to say too, is I'm not entirely sure where it will go. It seems to me that most of the national firms are not doing work locally, but I think as these firms continue to take local attorneys, there's a chance for a change in that, as some of the local clients, they will pay for these national firms.
And Lori, I have a bit of an interesting perspective on this. And me personally, in particular, I've done what I'll call rate arbitrage, for big clients for the past decade, where I've done a lot of work for national clients, and I was ultimately brought in as local counsel with some big firms, and they ultimately fired the big firms and then hired us to be their counsel, and they realized that we could do the same work for the same rate. And so, will there be some of that where they get some of our clients? The answer is probably, but I also think it's an opportunity for the local firms to continue the rate arbitrage. I mean, I do not envision us ever having the same hourly rate as Kirkland and Ellis, or even in a 75 to 80% range. I would never see that or expect it. And so, do I think I'm as good, or our attorneys are as good as the Kirkland and Ellis attorneys? You bet. And so I'm happy to go in there and compete with them and say we can do the same or better work for less and with less staffed attorneys. And so I think that's an opportunity for us, and how successful we are at that, is yet to be seen. But I think we've been successful in the past, and we will continue to be.
So we have the Utah Supreme Court's rules of professionalism and civility, and those set out all kinds of things that we hopefully follow in our practices. Do you think that the national firms working in Utah with Utah attorneys, or maybe not Utah attorneys, but not necessarily for Utah clients, are going to be following those same rules? Do you think it's an opportunity for us to educate the national firms about the way we conduct ourselves as professionals?
I hope so. I mean, I think we are a group of very civil attorneys here in Utah, with small, growing, but still small legal market. And so, your reputation here matters, and people remember your name. And so I'm hopeful that the folks coming in here will engage in the same practices of civility we've always engaged in. I haven't seen anything to indicate to the contrary. So.
Well, I would say, these big national firms, they have entire departments focused to, on meeting whatever the rules are. So I'm sure they will figure it out. And, I'm actually not too concerned about it. Whatever it is that needs to be done, I think, they'll figure it out and it will be great. And, and I would say, I actually do think one thing that I'm excited about is we already have, I think, fantastic attorneys in Salt Lake. I do work all over the country, and I think the attorneys here are as good as anywhere that I've ever come across. But to have some big national firms to bring in other, talented, bright attorneys, I think that's not a bad thing for the bar. I'm one that I would always rather have a smart, sophisticated, talented attorney on the other side as an adversary as compared to somebody that's incompetent, right? And so bringing that into the legal market, I think that's a net positive for the bar here in Utah. And so for what it's worth.
I don't disagree with Tyler or Liz, but I would say that this isn't just a normal maturation of our legal market. That's not what this is. And I'll just be candid. I mean, it doesn't really sit well, I think, with a lot of us in the local market about how, the labor shortage is being caused by attorneys being hired to work, to be hired here and to live here and have an office here, but they work out of state. That to me is not a normal maturation of the legal market. Instead, it would be, we have a higher and bigger demand for legal services and they move in because we don't have the attorneys to service our local, regional, and national clients here. And so I do think that that's kind of put some interesting strain and different strain on our bar and our community than we normally would have seen. I agree with Tyler. They do have, I'm sure, an army of people making sure they're complying. I'm not sure they're complying yet. I mean, there are practice pending admission rules, and you're not supposed to establish an office here unless you're admitted to practice and things. I'm not sure they're complying with all those things yet, but I suspect they will be. And I wish them well in that. I just, it's certainly putting a lot of strain on our bar and our legal community, and it's an interesting dynamic and cause. So,
how do you think this will impact the average local client who probably struggled to meet the rates of a local firm anyway? Because, you've got talent all the way down from the big firms to the medium firms, to the small firms, to the solos. There are good people out there working, but it's pretty hard for a local client. I mean, I used to tell my clients that I couldn't afford me. I couldn't have afforded me. So I'm wondering what this will do to just the average client out there with rates as high as they are. Do you think this will impact them in any way?
I'm sure it will. The question is, who is going to provide those services? I mean, I would just say I can speak for my practice. I've only been practicing for 14 years, but the longer my practice has gone on, the more specialized I've become, and essentially the larger clients I have. A lot of my smaller clients, now do go to smaller firms a lot of times. And so that's just my personal experience. And so, I do think there's still going to be this, again, Jason said, sort of a trickle down effect. I think this will continue to be kind of the larger firms here in town. We raised our rates. The truth is that may mean some of our clients that don't want to pay those rates might go to some smaller firms. So that's, again, an opportunity for some firms kind of at that next level to potentially pick up some clients. And then, same thing at then that level, if they raise some rates. And so again, how that flows down is going to be really interesting to see. I do think, and I could be wrong, but it seems to me like there's always attorneys out there at the bottom willing to take on work. The question is, what is the quality of that work? And right. So I think to your point, Lori, if you're saying, well, how is this going to hurt the average, client? Well, it could a little, in the sense that they now can't afford whatever level of service they had before. So they're going to have to go to a lower level, and then the expertise isn't quite as good. But I think they'll find somebody to do their work, would be my guess.
Maybe I have a little more, a slightly different outlook. I don't disagree with what Tyler said, but I also think there's a segment of society, small businesses, normal, what I call normal average individuals, and they have legal problems. You know, it's a breach of contract, or it's a debt collection issue or something, and attorney's fees may not be provided for by the contract or by a statute. And, you know, I've seen it, and I think we've all seen it here. And that is that there's a certain level of damages. You know, we have small claims court that covers a lot of that, but that, you know, what about the people who, you know, historically, I think the people who suffered maybe $10,000 to $25,000 in damages in that kind of a range, or if it's a criminal defense matter that's going to require considerable attorney's fees. I think there's been a segment of society who just can't afford an attorney, and it doesn't make sense. And they basically are left with, well, I'll just go to small claims court and see what I can get, and I'm just going to not get the rest of it. And I think that gap, you know, maybe right now it's 10 to 25,000. I think that's going to grow, and it's going to be maybe 10 to 50 or 10 to 40,000, because the inevitable trickle down of the rate increases is going to, I think, hurt those level of clients, and it's going to certainly put a pinch on access to justice for that level. I mean, I really think that's no doubt that's going to happen.
Do you know off the top of your head whether or not these big national firms have the same commitment to pro bono work that our local firms have? I don't know the answer to that question.
I can't speak for the specific national firms here, but I know that national firms generally have a pretty good commitment to pro bono work. Especially because they have so many associates. That's a great way to get associates real practical experience fast, is to allow them to work on these pro bono cases. And so I can't speak for the ones that are here, but I know generally speaking, national firms are very committed to pro work.
So do you think that our local market is being Walmartized, where Walmart comes in and drives out the small local mom and pop shops?
Yeah, a little bit, for sure. And I think that we'll see some firms close locally, small to mid, and maybe even bigger. I mean, I have no doubt that, again, I just, you know, maybe not, but I think that they will, you know, take over some at the top, and we'll see the trickle down. I mean, again, is the number of law firms and attorneys moving in commensurate with the demand in the local and regional market? And I think the answer is no. And the question then becomes, what happens to the demand for legal services nationally over the next few years? And I think that's probably going to go down. I mean, we've been in a pretty high growth, you know, economy for many, many years. And as we all know, that's not going to stay there forever. And so what's going to happen when it retracts, you know? But I to a degree, I guess, is my suspicion.
Okay.
I don't know if I would say Walmartized, but certainly changing, right? But I think, like I said at the beginning of this, it presents some good opportunities for local firms to take advantage of the, you know, decrease in talent that's now working with local clients, because they've gone to national firms to sort of see what they can do to build those relationships with local clients and get more of that work.
So do you think we can effectively sell the buy local theme for legal services?
I mean, I do think there's value in being a local firm that's been in Utah for a long time, has seen the changes in the market, has the historical knowledge. I think there is, you know, something we can say about the benefit of that.
You know, maybe, but it kind of depends on how you view, you know, private legal work in general. And I guess it's all about, my opinion is it's all about relationships anyway. And so if you can find the clients who are going to trust you and believe you're going to hold their best interests at heart and you're going to do great work for them, they're going to hire you. And I'm not sure that it's necessarily local versus national or regional. It's who they can trust. And I think there are a lot of businesses here locally and individuals who are interested not just in hiring a big name brand national firm, they are also interested in cost. And I think if they believe that they're going to get as good a service for a little bit lesser cost, they're going to hire the local firm.
You know, I want to analogize this to an experience I had when I first quit practicing and I came up to work in the law school. I sat in the 1L orientation meeting and I listened to our professors, and I walked out of that meeting thinking, you know, the Harvards and the Stanfords and the Princetons, they got nothing on us. I mean, our professors are so top notch that I think our students are getting a wonderful education, and they're very, very smart people who are teaching them. So I think there's a lot to be said for the talent that's coming out of, you know, my school and BYU. I worked with great BYU attorneys, and my husband's a BYU graduate. So I know that they're getting really good educations and can provide really, really good legal work. So that was just, you know, my experience of seeing a different perspective from the professors. But anyway.
Well, to go back to your sort of question about Walmart is, you know, some of it is you start thinking about like efficiency of the market. I do think there is a place, at least for what I do. I'm a transactional real estate attorney, and that most things that large firms, you know, big national firms do in transactional real estate, I do. I would say 90 some odd % of what they do, I do. But then there is a certain level of sophistication on certain issues that I do not do. I mean, this literally came up. I've had a large client doing a large transaction in out of state, that most of the transaction was just a very standard real estate transaction. And we are handling it, and it makes sense for us to handle it. We've done lots of deals there. We have a team, you know, on this transaction. But there was this really unique issue that came up that is not something we normally deal with. And it was like, well, we could spend a crazy amount of time becoming educated on this really unique issue. Or I work with big national firms all the time on these deals. I know somebody that's in this location. I can call them on the phone and we'll hire them as our local counsel on this deal for this specific issue. And yeah, you're paying $1,000 an hour, but you are, in fact, they're spending 5 hours on it as compared to us spending 50 hours on it to become educated to really answer the question. So I would say just started, you know, thinking of like the efficiency of the market. Again, I don't think that, you know, big national firms don't have a place. They do have a place. Again, they're successful for a reason. Again, how that's going to impact our market, there's all sorts of things that we've been talking about here. But do they have a place, and does it make sense? It totally makes sense. And I use them for lots of things. And the truth is, the reverse is as well. I get hired as local counsel all the time from big national firms to handle things here in Utah. Now when you then all of a sudden have a bunch of big national firms with offices here, there's a good chance I might lose some of that work, right? Because if instead of Kirkland and Ellis hiring me for local counsel here in Utah, they're just going to use someone in their local office, that will change. But again, it doesn't matter. Again, I think this just goes to this idea of where is the efficiencies, and again, that's where I think there's a lot of uncertainty. Is Kirton McConkie is a large firm in Salt Lake. How do we still keep our niche, keep our good clients, keep them happy, and be efficient in what we do, right? And finding what that is, knowing that again, there's larger firms or smaller firms, there's different areas of expertise, and like finding that efficiency. It's going to take some time, but I just think that's just part of what's going on here. And again, there's a lot of uncertainty with it, but I think that's something that at least we're thinking about a lot, is like who are we? What are the services we provide? What is the value we provide? Those sorts of things.
I think a lot of attorneys and firms struggle with that concept of particularly local ones. Who are we and who we serve? And it's an interesting contrast in the national firms coming in. Who do they serve? And I haven't worked at a national firm. I've worked against and with many, all of the firms that have moved in. Frankly, I've worked with or against. And they generally represent, in my experience, the big publicly traded companies. And that's, we have publicly traded clients, but they're not our stable of clients, right? And I think that when they're a big publicly traded client or company, they, the directors and the officers, they want to hire a big firm. They get cover with the big firm. They hire the big firm and say, you do whatever it takes. cover my tail, make sure that I'm getting the services I need. And so I think that at that point, they are less efficient. Tyler talked about efficiency. I agree. I think that the bigger law firms in general are much less efficient. They overwork issues, whether that leads to developing niche expertise. Yeah, that's one thing of it. But again, in my experience, they overstaff things, they overwork them because that's frankly what their clients want. And they want that protection, and they want to be able to say, look, I hired the best, they overstaffed it, and we still lost. Pass that on to the shareholders, right? But when you're working for a large private business, an international private business that's privately owned, they have a little different feel. They want to win, and they want to, whether it's a deal or litigation, and they want to do it. That's all they want to do, and they don't necessarily care about it being overworked and overstaffed. And so I do think, that's a big difference in who the local firms are versus who the national firms are. And frankly, I don't think that's going to change. I mean, and if it did change, then we'd become a national firm because we would inevitably grow that much, right? So.
And I think to add on to what Jason's saying is, it's one reason why I don't know. Next week is obviously the session with the national law firms, and I'm really interested to hear what they have to say. But the idea of them taking away certain large local clients seems unlikely to me because of exactly what Jason explained. I mean, I did a deal just in the last few months where it was out of state, and it was a huge law firm on the other side, and my client is a big national company, and we were the buyer on a real estate transaction, pretty sophisticated, large deal. But at closing, they had this big national, and it's not one of the national law firms that is coming here, it's a different one, but and they had their attorney's fees on the settlement statement, and they were 5 times what mine were. And it wasn't just me. Again, we had a team of attorneys. We had 3 or 4 attorneys on this deal. It was a large, sophisticated deal. And it's not, we did not do this cheaply. We did it like you should do it. And usually the buyer side is the more expensive side. You would expect that the seller side would be 50 to 75% of the buyer side. And in this instance, again, I think they were 5 times what our bill was, and they were the seller side. And so I just look at that and I'm like, that seems unlikely that you would have local firms saying there is this great value. Again, if it's some huge company and they're saying, yeah, we want no stone left unturned, and we're willing to pay essentially that premium for that kind of overstaffing and kind of level of due diligence, that's fine. But I just, even of my large clients, it seems unlikely that they're going to want to pay for all of that. Again, the expertise stuff is different, and I kind of explained that already. That's a different story, but sort of the day-to-day, deals and litigation, do they really want to pay for that? And maybe they do, I don't know. But I would say the cost disparity, it's not like it's double. It's 4, 5, 6 times, 10 times. I mean, it's the level of the cost is so exponential compared to what we do locally. And again, it's not that my rate's cheap or Jason or Liz. I mean, we're not cheap, and yet the most of the national firms are so much higher than what we charge.
So are the big national firms, I mean, you made this you distinguished the publicly traded company with the not publicly traded company, but do you see them trying to get work across all substantive areas of law, or are they targeting specific substantive areas of law? Do you know? And again, in my experience with publicly traded companies, if it's high risk, they're definitely going to go with a bigger national law firm because it's going to give them, they're going to have manpower, and they have people that they can throw at it, and it's going to also give the officers and directors cover that they're doing whatever it takes to protect it. And if it's smaller issues and smaller deals, and maybe they spin it off. But once you have a relationship with a firm, you often stick with it. Again, I come back to what I said before, and that is that I think in private practice, relationships are key, and that's how you develop work. And if you start going down a path with a big firm, I think they often stay with it. But I have seen some companies who are our clients where they may have like a big, some
more niche idea, or maybe it's something in an odd location and they'll go to a national firm and utilize them for that.
Do you think the sandbox has impacted the development of national firms? I don't see that sandbox because it's still traditional legal work that they're doing, isn't it? Okay. What would your advice be to law students? And we touched on this at the beginning about, there's a potential risk that they may not be eligible to come in at their actual years out of graduation because of what they've learned. Would you have any advice to the law students that want to stay in Utah?
Liz, you want to start?
Every law student's different, right? And it kind of depends on what the law student is looking for, short-term and long-term. Law school is expensive. I don't fault someone if they want to go make a bunch of money, but there is, like we talked about, the potential risk that maybe skills they come out of there with aren't as marketable if they want to switch firms long-term. And maybe they are. It's a case by case, and it's too difficult to say for sure. But I think it's more than just about being a lawyer. People also care about their free time. For example, I live in Utah. I moved to Utah because of the outdoors. I didn't move here to only be able to look at the outdoors from my office. And that's not an experience I would have wanted straight out of law school. And for me, it's to make a little bit less for the quality of life. But it's just important for every law student to kind of evaluate what they're looking for in a career, short-term and long-term, weigh the risks and benefits and make a decision based on that.
Do you feel it's incumbent on the hiring committees to explain that to students, or do you think that's incumbent on the law schools to explain that to students?
All of the above. I mean, and I think that what I would, I've been on the hiring committee, I've been on our board for a long time, I've been president for 5 years, and I'm like, I've had a lot of discussions with a lot of law students about this, and again, I think that the older and more worldly they are, the more they get it. I think it's hard to translate, but I mean, I kind of, one of the things that I always tell people when I'm interviewing someone who's also interviewing at a regional or national firm is, look, there's 52 weeks in a year. And, a lot of times the difference between a regional and a local or a national and local is 200 to 400 hours of more billable hours per year. And if you think about it in work weeks, that's like taking 200 extra billable hours is taking 5 extra work weeks and jamming them into a 52-week year. And 400 extra billable hours is 10 work weeks you're jamming into the year. If they value their free time, if they value their career development over short-term dollars, then they should look at local firms. And if they need the money, they don't care about having more of a lifestyle outside, then I think the national firms are more for them. That would be my general pitch. Do their investigation of what's really, and I would say do your investigation of what's really required, because I would also say that in the hiring process, every law firm is going to spin and paint a really good picture of their firm. The proof is in the pudding. Ask the attorneys you interview, how long have they been there? Why have they stayed at the firm? Have they looked at other options? Do some research out there.
So as our market has increased in size, I used to listen to my mentors talk about back in the early 80s, how collegial the bar was and how everyone, went to lunch together all the time. If you had a trial with opposing counsel, you guys would go to lunch. I mean, it was very collegial. And as the size of the bar grew, there was this view that civility decreased. Do you see that happening even more with these big national firms who are coming in from what I'm presuming to be less civil markets, because we're nice in Utah, right? Do you see an impact on civility?
I don't know. I mean, I'm interested to see. I think I actually still think the Salt Lake legal market is very, great civility and professionalism generally across the board. I mean, there's a few folks here and there that I would prefer not to work with, but that list is pretty small. And but I would say generally across the country, there are certain markets where I feel like they have a more aggressive style. But that's not necessarily that. There are also people, one of the nicest attorneys I ever worked with was a attorney at a big national firm in Chicago. And he was just fantastic and just very civil, very, great to work with, very collaborative. And so it still does come down to people. Jason said that earlier. I think that it's, we talk about these things very big picture and about, the market and these firms, but it comes down to individuals. And gratefully, I think in Salt Lake, we've done a great job of keeping that. And I'm hopeful that even if there are some folks that are coming from other places where they are less civil, hopefully we will have a positive influence on that outlook. But, I guess we'll see.
Yeah, instead of us becoming less civil, we can get them to become more civil.
Exactly.
So do you think there's a creative opportunity for the local firms to somehow ally with one another when you're competing for work with a big mega firm coming in? Create cross firm practices sort of idea?
I actually do know that happens with some smaller firms and versus kind of medium and larger firms. I can think of a couple of instances where they have certain arrangements like that. So I guess maybe, I don't know that that's something that we've spent a lot of time thinking about, at least for Kirton.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting idea for sure. And I know in the past, Waldo has had sort of relationships with other firms where there's types of work that we don't do, but we've worked with them kind of as co-counsel repeatedly on certain issues. So I haven't thought about it as an attempt to challenge a national firm for work, but it's an interesting idea.
I mean, I think the answer is yes. And it depends on the work you're pitching for. I mean, where you would have that advantage, or maybe you'd want to try to get it, would be in like you're pitching for a huge deal or maybe a huge piece of litigation for the state or something. And two firms have, maybe some complementary experiences, and you could submit a joint RFP or something, and that's going to have a more diverse team and a deeper team that would let you compete with, some massive team that, one of the national firms puts up. So the answer is yes. But of course, you don't want everybody grouping together. Then you might have some anti-competitive concerns. But I think on a small level for particular cases, absolutely.
So there's a question here that I find very interesting, and that is comparing the situation the large local firms are in now, competing or having the big national firms moving in, compared to what it was like for the small firms trying to compete with the large local firms. So it's kind of, the Samson and Goliath idea used to be the little firms against the big firms, and now it's the big firms against the big firms. So I was wondering if you're sensing any of that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's again, it's trying to find sort of efficiency and where it is that you make sense, and I think that's sort of a lot. I kind of already explained that, at least my thinking on that, and I am 100% sure. I mean, as Kirton McConkie, we need to be more focused on who is it that we are, who are our clients, how can we best take care of them, how can we best take care of our people, right? I mean, we're all sort of forced to look internally and be like, how can I be a little bit better here in what I'm doing? And to then keep good associates, to then develop people that are then going to be our future partners, and and make sure our clients are happy with our responsiveness and costs and all sorts of things. Again, I think it is there's lots of self-reflection going on at least at our firm, and thinking about what is it that we do, how can we do it better, and I think that's really important. So as far as that competition goes, yeah, I mean, that's something that's hitting everybody.
Go ahead, Jason.
I was just going to say, I see there's one last question up there, and it kind of dovetails with what Tyler was just saying. It was, are there any pros of the national firms coming to town? And I think the answer is yes. I mean, it's going to make us better. I mean, it's going to competition, I think, is good for all of us. And, is it going to be a tight labor market? And is it going to be challenging? You bet, but we're going to be better attorneys and better law firms for it. I mean, I've never been shy about going toe to toe with one of the big firms, and I think this will bring them toe to toe more often. And so, whether it's in recruiting or in opposing counsel, and so I think it's great. So,
well, and that self-reflection that Tyler was talking about, I think that's a huge benefit, because that ongoing self-analysis, not individually, as a practice group, as a firm, however you want to look at it, that can only help.
That's right.
Everyone, right? It helps you, it helps clients, it helps society. So I mean, I do see that as a huge plus if a forces more of that kind of focus, I think.
Yeah, and I would say, for the most part, I'm actually not that concerned about the big national firms coming, other than sort of the labor shortage and how we're going to have to tweak things that we do. But again, I think we're going to be able to figure it out. It's just, it's causing some disruption right now. But in the end, I think it will be fine, and they're going to be successful, and we'll be successful. And, I think we'll figure it out. But right now, I don't know exactly where it's going to go, is my thought.
Well, thank you all so much. I mean, this has been a huge topic that's been discussed, for months now. And I'm really grateful that you came in to talk about it and give us your perspective. Next week, as Tyler mentioned, we're having a panel with the national firms talking on much the same thing. And I'm really grateful that you did this. I'm grateful that you are conscious of the professionalism and civility that is involved in all of these changes and transitions, and for the work you do for our community and for the law school. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks,
See you
Lori.
all soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks
Bye.
to all of you who attended.